Kia ora. Good morning from New Zealand, and welcome everybody to this panel. I'm really excited to be here in the room with these wonderful creative practitioners. This panel is called Crisscross Boundary Hopping in Creativity. My name is Michelle Elvey. I'm the founder and editor of National Flash Fiction Day and Flash Frontier, and work in a lot of platforms where we like to traverse the boundary. I'm also the founding editor of At the Bay Ite Kokoro, which is a online space as well as a publishing space where we really encourage the hybrid and practice and see what comes out of experimentation. So I'm especially excited to be here in this panel with this group of amazing women, and I'm looking forward to our hour together. This is, of course, a panel that's part of our Festival of Flash, which we run every year in conjunction with National Flash Fiction Day, which takes place on June 22nd every year in New Zealand. It's also connected with Flash Frontier's Roundtable series. And so this recording, we'll share it in both spaces. The Roundtable series is something we started this year where we invite people from different backgrounds, different disciplines. Sometimes it's across science and art. It's across different mediums of expression, and it's really exciting. We have filmmakers and scientists and poets and all kinds of people, visual artists in the mix in those conversations. So this also dovetails with that really nicely. So welcome to this kind of dual purpose conversation. I'm going to let everybody here introduce themselves because there's so much to say. And rather than reading a bio, I'd love to just hand it over to each of you to introduce yourself and share a bit about your background and where you are with your practice today and maybe how you've gotten here. So we'll start with Cassandra and just go around the room. Good morning, Cassandra. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michelle. I'm excited to be here with everyone. My name's Cassandra Atherton. I'm a distinguished professor of writing and literature at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. And I've always been a prose poet and a flash fiction practitioner. So even when I first started at university, I was always writing short form because I find the form so exciting to write, something about the compression, something about the way that it moves people, even looking at it on the page. But sadly, I couldn't find a group of people to hang with, like, especially when you write a lot of prose poetry. The poets say, well, you're not really a poet. And the fiction writers don't get it either. So they're like, well, you don't belong here either. And the same thing would happen. Like I would submit, to journals, and the poetry editor would say, well, it's not poetry. You should send it to the fiction editor. And the fiction editor would say, well, no, you should send it to the poetry editor. They'll like it. So, prose poetry and flash fiction hadn't really taken off as forms. And so people were still getting used to them, even though there were some great practitioners early on. And so I guess one of the things that I love doing now is to make opportunities for prose poets and flash fiction writers in particular. So while I write a lot of scholarship on both forms, I also love editing journals. I love meeting people and reading their incredible pieces when I'm editing lots of books and lots of work. So hopefully opening up that space so people don't feel lonely, which I have to say, I kind of did in my early practice.
Awesome. Kia ora, I'm Clarice Harvey. I'm a poet and a producer and a writer and a mother as well. I studied film and majored in script writing, and then I've produced for directors all around the world, mostly doing TV commercials and documentaries. And I've found myself writing more and more, something I've always loved. And yeah, it's a means of communication, and for me the best means of communication, writing every day. It's great to be here.
Kia ora. Lovely to hear the introduction so far, and I could really relate to the things that you were saying, Cassandra, about that middle space that is kind of possibly prose poetry, possibly flash fiction. My first book was about Harry Houdini, and when I wrote it, it was a series of poems and pieces of found prose, and much to my surprise, it was treated as poetry, and I didn't think of it as poetry. If someone had asked me what I thought it was a novella, a non-continuous novella. But the sort of the genre police came along, and it became poetry, and uh, I guess I feel like I'm still uh, in a sort of middle space, where some of what I write is clearly poetry, some of it is prose and is poetic. And I also have quite a strong interest when I'm putting a book together in uh, making things somewhat narrative. Um, so yeah, I continue to find myself in awkward territory, and right at the moment, I am quite occupied by writing quite political poetry, and I'm trying to find, well, quite political stuff, and I'm trying to find a form for it. And to be honest, I still haven't really found what I think is the best form. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the discussion.
Kia ora koutou. My name's Tracy Farr. I'm coming to you today from Poniki, Wellington in Aotearoa, but my beginnings are on the other side of the Tasman. I was born in Melbourne, Cassandra, kia ora, and grew up on the other side of Australia on Wajak Buja in Perth, with Western Australia. So I love it's been fantastic getting to hear all of you introduce yourselves and pick up on some of the kind of congruencies and things. But my background, I think, for what it's worth in terms of crossing boundaries, I think my throwaway line when I introduce myself or write a bio of myself is I'm a writer who used to be a scientist. And so I came to writing quite late, to published writing quite late. And so my early career and my studies were all in science, in biological science. But always carrying English and writing along beside it, as well as theatre and fine arts, kind of just as a dabbler. And so in the last 10 to 15 to 20 years, I've shifted away from science. I like to describe myself as a recovering scientist because I don't do it anymore, but it's always kind of there waiting to grab me in the background. And so I often also, like Lynn, find myself in an awkward kind of territory. Sometimes I feel I'm neither fish nor fowl. But my focus in more recent years has been on writing novels. My third novel was published last year. It's called Wonderland, and again, kind of dabbling. I've found that my last couple of novels and the one that I'm embarking on at the moment seem to want to thread poetry through them. They seem to want to thread aspects of real historical events or characters through them, whether they're fictionalized or whether they're just an inspiration. And so I'm always finding myself in these awkward territories between spaces. So I guess that's kind of a starting point for where I am at the moment.
Actually, wonderful to hear all of you talk about your own background and your experience and where you're coming to. And I must say, no one in the room seems actually awkward, but it's interesting talking about the awkward spaces. And I think that comes from those kind of labels and categories, which I've been sort of, fighting against my whole creative life as well. I loved what Tracy said. I'm going to spontaneously throw this question out there. I love the idea that I'm now formerly a scientist, used to be a scientist. In my case, I was once upon a time a historian, and I lived in Germany for a long time, and I practiced as a historian and taught at a university in the United States for a little while, and then eventually left that and meandered around the world a bit and found myself in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So it was a bit of a meandering path, but I find that my background in history is always a part of my creative practice because I really love, I mean, I think that's why I love editing. I edit a lot of anthologies. I edit a lot of online journals. I love the discipline and the research and the kind of grounded work that is required to sort of think through really complicated ideas, which is often what anthology work is about. And I think I'm always sort of building on that history practice, that ability, that kind of the desire to manage many different inputs of information at once, which is what you're doing when you're thinking about history or when you're in an archive doing your research. But of course, the creative spaces mean we open ourselves up to what's coming. But I just want to ask everybody, Cassandra, Lynn, and Clarice, if you had to answer that sentence, I'm now a something, formerly a blank. What would the formerly be? What would you say to that? Cassandra.
Yeah, I know that I know that now I say I'm a prose poet. Prior to that, I guess I used to be a dancer. So I spent a lot of my life dancing and teaching dance before I moved into doing a PhD and being a university professor. So, and I like to think it's such an interesting question. I like to think that quite a lot of my experience in that area has fed and continues to feed my prose poetry practice. So yeah, that's a fascinating question.
Well,
Mm.
I'm so glad to hear that answer too. That's so neat. And, maybe we wouldn't have known it otherwise. So, yeah, Clarice.
Yeah, I would say I always saw myself as a facilitator of other people's creativity because as a producer, it's your job to make sure that the show goes on and you're almost a dresser. You're getting the director ready for the production and all the elements. And I was often contributing ideas along the way, especially in the script writing process, which would be making the thing more expensive. Or so I wasn't, although I'm still a producer, I'm not a budget slasher because I'm always trying to make the story more interesting or captivating. So yeah, I would say I'm formerly a creative facilitator, and I still love that element in all types of creativity, getting people together, which is why something like this is really great to be a part of. So thanks, Michelle.
Yes, I was thinking about this because I spent about 25 years as a psychologist. And like you were saying, Tracy, about the recovery, uh, I I tried to ignore that actually when I first started writing. I tried to distance myself from it. Because people would say to me, "Oh, I bet you have interesting stories to tell." And I would think, no way will I ever tell any of these stories. I want to be in a different world from this. And but the sort of the discipline training of what you start with, I think, is always with you. And one of the things that's always with me, and it influences my taste heavily, is I I suffer from a desire to understand the human condition. And and so I love any work of any form that tells me something I knew about the human condition. That's what's left of that work, which is now 25 years ago. So, or 20, roughly 20 odd years ago. So, yes, I've done the writing thing now about as almost as long as I did the psychology thing.
It's wonderful to hear how these different experiences and disciplines, play into who we are today and also how we go about our creative practice. And everybody you all have such different backgrounds. That's really neat. And I knew a little bit about some of them, but I love hearing you talk about it here. And it sort of relates to this idea that everybody has touched on a little bit that we tend to have these categories and these ways of talking about the creative arts or anything really in these disciplines with definition. You say, I'm a novelist, or I'm a short story writer, or I'm a poet. But I think we're all sort of bucking against that system a bit here, as well as a lot of other people. I mean, we're not alone. There are a lot of people who traverse those boundaries quite well. And I think that's a really good example to look at. But what I'm always thinking about is that those categories, they tend to be sort of top down. I mean, we all know publishers need to name something because they need to market it. And that's kind of a bottom line thing that makes a lot of sense. But they do tend to be ways that we categorize and we create patterns and we create that kind of common ground in these sections because it helps us get our heads around, well, is it a poem or is it a story? People are often asking that. And of course, I teach creative writing like a lot of you. And, I'm often saying, well, yes, we can talk about the categories, but we need to understand things beyond the categories. So one thing I was thinking of is that those categories are kind of a top-down structure, but something Lynn said when she was talking about Dear Sweet Harry is about how you find materials. You said some of your work, some of those materials are found. And I'm sure a lot of us work in that found space in everything we do, because I think almost every poem or everything I write is something found, and I love thinking about it that way, because that means that it's out there, sort of separate from us, and we can look at it, examine it, pull it in, and maybe do with it. We have more freedom to think about what to do with it, rather than thinking, well, I'm going to write a poem today. And I wonder what you all think about that. The idea that, you're always kind of aware. I mean, you all are pretty savvy, in terms of the field, but you're aware of those categories, but you're also finding things along the way. That creative process is always organic. And that's where the best space is, I think. What do you think about that? What could each of you say about that?
I think probably one of the things I've always thought, and this kind of reflects a little bit what Lynn was saying about carrying your former practice with you, is that what I carry with me from my science background is an observational eye and a curiosity, and so which I think are things that people don't necessarily think of as being something that's part of science, but they are. And so I think I feel as though, as a writer, I'm always open for those things that are whizzing at me. So which is one of the things you were talking about, Michelle, both those being open to those things, but also thinking about the categories. And so what I find in my own writing practice is that the things that tend to feed it and prime it and surprise my writing most are things that are not about writing. So they come from the worlds of film or music, or they come from going to an art exhibition, or they come from knitting or dyeing, or something completely on the surface unrelated to writing as such. And honestly, that's where the kind of richest seams for me come from. So yes, I think that leads me to be open to being a bit fuzzy in how I describe my writing, the writing that results from that. But I am utterly aware that that means that I'm often completely flummoxed when it comes to being in a sort of social situation or something like that. And someone says, "Oh, what kind of stuff do you write?" And it's like, I don't know. How do I describe that to you in a social situation? I don't know. So having those shorthand ways to describe things, I write novels. That's handy. That's handy. So yeah.
I think at a dinner party or a cocktail party, you should just say all of that, Tracy.
Why have you left the room?
So excellent. Yeah. Cassandra, sorry, you were about to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I love reading. I've always loved reading from the time I was really small, and my grandparents would read stories to me. And I think intertextuality for me is still really important. So something I read that I don't expect is necessarily going to make a huge impact. There's just something about it, or there's the little kernel of something that I want to use, but I want to use it in a different way. I'm always really careful and make sure it's very clear, it's some kind of little intertextual moment. And I like to think that for those people who are interested in that element, it opens up a different space. And people have often said they'll go to a novel or a collection of something that I might have mentioned, or a character's name or something that's part of my reading. And, then they go to that and get another level of perhaps what the poem's about, or perhaps what the prose poem's about. So I think I'm always reading and always finding ways of incorporating that reading into what I do. So that's the excitement for me.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, for me, I find I love stories, the art of storytelling. And I grew up as the youngest of 5 children. And so to sort of get any sort of kudos, as it were, in that huge setting, it was you had to have a great story. And so and the more fabulous the better, and a little bit of truth bending. And I find I love hearing stories from other people, and so throughout my day I will always be sort of gathering stories, and a lot of those characters or things that they've said I journal and keep and reuse. I feel like they're real treasures that humans produce, these little glimpses of their lives. I'm always very grateful for those as a writer. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because I think one of the things that psychology has taught me is about tuning into what people say. Those little nuggets where they tell you exactly what they mean, just what the world is meaning to them. I read a lot of non-fiction. I'm always sort of like pursuing some topic or topics that are of interest to me. And I often find that the non-fiction feeds into the creative work that I do. It might be just some phrase, or it might be a way of thinking, or something that produces, sort of like opportunities for me to think about things and explore things. So there's a very direct link there. And also, of course, running parallel to non-fiction reading is, reading excellent creative work that's exciting, and of course that jumps off into creative ideas for me as well.
Yeah, I think that space between, what we're all describing sort of as the real world, the world around us. I mean, I think if you are interested in creative expression, you are automatically tuned into what's happening in the world around us, whether it's through a political lens or an aesthetic lens, or a walking through the forest lens, which is a kind of a feeling space that you're entering. I think everybody, all of us, would have that kind of deep and maybe innate connection to looking outwards while also figuring out how to incorporate it inwards. I was thinking about what you were saying, Lynn, with your practice in psychology, and Tracy in science, and all of us having these diverse backgrounds. And it made me think of, I came across a quote a while ago by the Jamaican poet Kwame Dawes. And I shared it in one of my classes last week, so it's here, and I'm just going to read it because I think it's wonderful and gives us more to think about here. Of course, he's talking about poetry, but I would say this applies also really well to this kind of interspatial creative work that we're talking about, because again, where that creativity is thriving. He says poetry offers us the capacity to carry in us and express the contradictory impulses that make us human. And when I read that, I thought, well, that's what that's what the creative practice is doing, because it's never an easy story, no matter what you're writing, is it? Fiction, nonfiction, poetry, essay, it's never easy. So I love that, to offer a path, the capacity to carry in us, to carry, not just put it out there and leave it. We're carrying it always, and express the contradictory impulses that make us human. I wonder if anybody wants to respond to that. I think it's a really great idea.
A similar statement is something that, William Blake said about how if you don't have the contradictory forces, then you don't have progression. Like you need both to move. And I kind of really like that idea of carrying those inside us and then feeding into our practice, because I do see that as these constant conflicting impulses feed one another and do keep that progression going for me.
Mm.
Yeah, and the roundtable theme this month for Flash Frontier is about movement. And so, again, that's why this panel fits so well into that idea. It's a really general, broad theme. But, everybody, we're always moving between things. And that idea of forward progression movement is also, I think, critical to the creative practice. Yeah. Anyone else want to talk about those contradictory impulses that you feel, even from your own personal experiences? Have they ever gone unresolved, or are they the things that help push you forward? Again, that curiosity that I think we all share.
I think the only thing I'd offer up is the sense that a piece of writing that sort of doesn't make space for contradictions is probably very boring. I mean, contradictions almost, provide the tension, maybe that provides interest and that forward motion as well. Although with contradictions, it can, I guess, be, two steps forward, one step back, or the other way around. So, yeah, it provides a dynamic, doesn't it?
I was just thinking about that because the poem that I'm going to read later is about the space between what has now become tribes, the sort of political tribes, and how difficult it is to communicate with each other these days. And so, I guess you could say there's like, healthy and interesting contrasts between, ideas. And then there's also scary contrasts between ideas. And I don't think we, as writers, can entirely hide from that either.
Mm.
Yeah, that's right. Lynn, you said it's the poem you're going to read later, but I think later might be now. I'd love to hear you read it, and it fits right in with what you're talking about, I suppose. Yeah.
It surely does.
Let's hear it.
So I'm reading it, but as I was saying at the beginning, I don't really know what it should look like. So fortunately, I'm spared from having to show you what it looks like because you can't see it. So the poem is called A Sook in the Supermarket Car Park. Yeah, I'll go on to talk about what a sook is. The ute in the New World car park has a proud, dirty diesel sticker on the left-hand side of its back bumper. And on the right-hand side, a sticker says, "Have a sook, cunt." In primary school, a sook was someone who cried over something they should have been able to bear, like being punched every day on the way to school or having their lunch stolen. Here in the New World car park, having a sook is the act of crying over something you should be able to bear, like climate collapse or the dead children of Gaza. On the back bumper of a ute, cunt is a term of abuse. My car has Toi Tu Te Tiriti on the front bumper and Free Palestine on the back. It is not my intention to scare people, but perhaps the word Te or the word Palestine scares the man in the ute. That same day, a friend said she is increasingly of the opinion that people are mostly good and that we can never resolve the differences if we don't hear each other's views, however painful that might be. I want to believe her, I do. That same day, I heard about a woman who was wrapped in blankets and comforted by strangers as she waited for an ambulance. And I thought perhaps the man who drives the ute would pull a stranger's car out of floodwaters or chainsaw a fallen tree to let a neighbour out of her drive after a storm. I've needed help like that, and it has been freely given. Right now, the man in the ute and I are standing a safe distance back from the line of contact, while our cars shoot slogans across the gap. Will one of us stand up and be seen? Here I am, I could say, a person with high cholesterol, a mother with dementia, and a little dog with silky ears that I stroke when I am scared. What frightens you? That's it.
Bravo. Love it.
Wow. I love that space in there. And of course, you introduced it by saying it's about space, but it's about that kind of gap between people, but also there's a lot of connectivity in that as well. So there's gap and connection. And again, these are these contradictory forces, I suppose, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
I might say that my poem's a little bit similar because it's about a stranger as well, getting closer to a stranger. So,
Oh, how interesting.
yeah, I really enjoyed listening to that.
Really
And maybe
interesting. And
that's
is it a new poem, Clarice?
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it might be quite nice to hear it now. I'm just going to say right here, you all introduced yourselves, but of course you didn't include your many, many accolades because, you know, we usually don't. But Lynn's book, The Gum Trees of Kerry Kerry, which is a poetry collection, but also, you know, in that hybrid space, creative nonfiction, prose poem. It's highly analytical and observational while also being really poetic. It won the Kathleen Grattan Poetry Prize last year and was published in March this year by Otago University Press. So it's a really fantastic book, and that's Lynn's most recent prize. Clarice last year won the National Flash Fiction Day competition. So I noticed in your introduction, you talked about your work in your past and that you're coming to creative writing now. But boy, you've come with a bang, haven't you? I think it's really wonderful. And that story was published last year, and you can hear Clarice read it, of course, as well. And yeah, really fantastic. Tracy's book, Wonderland, her, I would say, novel, I guess, yeah, novel, was on the long list for the Occam Fiction Award this year. And yeah, really fantastic because, again, as Tracy's talked about, is in that space where it's, you know, moving, playing with the form, I would say, you know, call it what you want, but it was in the fiction category, and that was very good. And Cassandra, I'll just say this, is a real force of nature in terms of the many anthologies and other work that she puts forth, again, to bring a lot of creative people together, including the newest one that's, am I allowed to say this? That's
yeah, of course.
forthcoming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Forthcoming, and it's in the realm of ekphrastic. So
It is.
maybe when we come back to you,
Mhm.
we'll talk a little bit about, because that ekphrastic writing is also always about something external, observational, and then creating something, you know, new from it. Not just
Yeah.
writing about it in a simplistic way, but turning over some other ideas. So really complicated and wonderful accomplishments of everybody in the room. So it's really, really great. And I just wanted to say that before asking Clarice, why don't you read your poem now? That'd be wonderful to hear.
Thank you. And also, wow, I'm amongst so many accomplished writers. It's a real, including yourself, Michelle. So, yeah. This poem is called Half Marathon Butterfly. I love to run. I don't often run half marathons, but this was just a sort of a conjuring that came along as I was running. Eye on the butterfly. She was the lady wearing wings. When I finally caught up to her, I saw she had a tattoo on her shoulder blade. It showed a queasy-coloured skull with a white rat on top. The rat was snarling. And for a long time, just running just behind her, I watched its teeth. I thought about the woman at the car rental company yesterday that had told me that her brother had died of a flesh-eating disease. He'd texted her, but her phone, it was in her locker at work. He'd said, "Come get me, sis," but she'd missed it. The rental car manager appeared and somehow maneuvered the conversation to the fact that she'd once kissed Sean Connery. And I said to my husband, "I'm not going home until I've kissed that man." Nothing he could do about it. And we both stood there looking at her. But here, running along the highway, chasing the butterfly, I thought I'd like to know the story behind the rat and the skull, the ancient alchemy of raising the dead, the phone and the locker, pushing against inevitable time. Is this what I was running for?
Mm.
Really wonderful. What a wonderful reading. You know what I notice is that both you and Lynn, do I have this right? Yes, you both end with a question, don't you?
Mm. Mm.
Lynn's question was, tell us again.
What frightens you?
Mm.
And Clarice, read your last line again.
Is this what I was running for?
Mm.
Really neat to hear those side by side.
Mm.
Wow. Wow, really interesting. Which I suppose kind of brings on this idea of everything about the creative practice is about asking questions, not entering a space unafraid. Entering a space unafraid. You have to kind of go in, I wouldn't say, being bold, but perhaps quietly, opening up your perceptive, signals that allow the things in and allow you to ask questions, which of course goes back to something Tracy said early on about curiosity in science. But I think curiosity is there in all of our human capacity. Asking questions. What kind of questions do you all ask when you're writing? Tracy and Cassandra, you want to talk about that a little bit? And does that lead to your readings, perhaps?
What kind of questions do I ask? I ask
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. What shall I ask today?
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's not something I consciously think about when I'm writing. I
Yeah.
don't consciously think about the questions I'm asking. Although it's pertinent because I've just, talking about hopping boundaries, crossing boundaries, I've just started. I'm just 3 months into a PhD in creative writing at the IAML. So I'm having to ask myself those questions quite specifically. What is my research question? So I am having to be more conscious about that, and I am finding it challenging. So it does shift. It is shifting my practice, but I'm not far enough into it yet to know how. So I'm gonna fudge my answer to that question, and say that the questions I'm asking myself is it's in my mind, but I'm struggling with it at the moment. Mm.
I was thinking of the fact that I have been working a lot in this ekphrastic space, which is a really interesting, and we talk about it as a third space, where the poet or the writer sort of meets the artwork somewhere in between the poem and the artwork or the performance itself. And one of the questions that I always have in my head, and it's through that kind of collaborative space and working with other people and how enriching that is, and even being here today with everyone and hearing their responses is always really enriching and feeds somehow into our practice. But he said to me in an art gallery once, and he writes a lot of ekphrastic poetry, if an artwork could talk, what would it say? And so when I'm kind of in a space where I'm thinking about art, I am sort of asking that question of myself in a kind of highly creative way. And I'm also questioning things like, well, what is an artwork? And that's been part of some of the thinking I've been doing around ekphrastic work. It can be quite traditional about, ekphrastic work being about paintings or sculptures. But what about the fact that people now write about bento boxes, which are kind of food as artworks? What about film? What about photography, which wasn't always accepted in that kind of labeling? I guess we're coming back to what Michelle's talking about, how do you kind of progress through these labels that we have for various reasons, but to be all encompassing rather than have it shut things down, I suppose. So yeah, those questions are kind of feeding me at the moment. In these kinds of spaces. It's like I think we talk about ekphrastic work as a creative entanglement, which I quite like. So being in this space and it not just being one way, received one way or going one way, it's this constant back and forth.
Yeah, and there we are at movement again. That entanglement, I think, again, is something that, we would all run towards, not away from, for sure. Yeah.
I was going to say that there doesn't, I'm no expert in ekphrastic theory, but to me there doesn't seem to be a great difference between ekphrastic and the sort of intertextuality that happens with writing. That, we can, and I do, write in conversation and in response to other people's writing, and that feels to me like ekphrastic activity.
It kind of is, and some people would say it totally is, but others would say that it's sort of more about translating something visual into text rather than text into text. But there's plenty of people that will talk about the kind of ekphrastic elements of intertextuality, and I love intertextuality, so I think that's fascinating.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about that. Lynn's piece was in response to the visual, the bumper sticker there. Clara's had the tattoo, so we are, but again, that's just part of our probably everyday existence. When you walk out the front door, or when you get up and have your first cup of coffee, there is something that you're observing and internalizing that's going to go into your creative day, no doubt about it.
And I think thinking about your question about questions, it occurred to me as we've all been talking that probably the question I most ask myself in my writing practice is, for all these disparate kind of things that I've collected that are of interest, how do they connect? And so again a little bit dynamic, a little bit about movement, and a little bit about making connections where perhaps connections don't necessarily obviously exist. How can I make those connections or find those connections? So
Yeah.
I've also been thinking about writing as a form of justice. That's really important to me. Finding voices, listening to voices that are often not heard, and bringing them in to writing, which may have a bigger audience. I often talk with homeless people, marginalized people, and they've always got amazing stories, and they give you a lot. And so if you can sort of weave in that as a those questions as well, I find really interesting.
And again, that itself is breaking down the boundaries. Art is not some kind of, space that's separated off from other people. Art is for everybody. We had a panel yesterday, and Josiah Morgan was saying that, everyone has creative expression. I'm paraphrasing, and I think he probably said it more elegantly, but the idea that, you know, whether you know it or not, you're creating, we're always expressing ourselves. And some people like to say, oh no, I'm not an artist, or oh yes, I am an artist, in some kind of elevated manner. But I think the really wonderful example that he said was that when you read in an animated voice to your children, that's artistic expression, right? You're just finding it within you and it's coming out. And I love that idea. And I think, again, what you're saying, Clarice, is really demanding that we listen more carefully and that we pay attention to those spaces that are, you know, outside of what we might talk about as art, let's say. Yeah, creative expression. Tracy or Cassandra, this idea of entanglement, this idea of asking questions, does that perhaps relate to either one of your readings? And one of you like to share something now?
Yeah, mine fits quite nicely with the way that the conversation has headed. I have a prose poem called Forgetting Hiroshima Triptych. So I'm writing a lot about the atomic bomb and a lot about the Hiroshima maidens, who were a bunch of women scarred horribly by the atomic bomb and taken to America for plastic surgery to make them marriageable. So there's many, many levels of problems there that I'm writing about, but also asking lots of questions in this space too about who has the right to talk and how, and questions of appropriation. All of those things enter into this particular project I'm working on. So this is a two-part prose poem, Forgetting Hiroshima Diptych. Nothing happened in Hiroshima. Our story ends before we board the Shinkansen. You should take back the omelette wet with eggy juice and the miso soup served with 3 silver pieces of mackerel. We weren't there. We never sat cross-legged, prizing oysters from their shells. You didn't cry at the museum in front of the colloid suspended in glass. Nothing happened in Hiroshima. Forget me straddling you in the blue of the Seto Inland Sea, your fingers mapping the irregular coastline down my backbone as a new language haunts our lips. Everything happened in Hiroshima. In the deep silence, a mother calls her child's name as they pull bodies with a fire hook from the river. 2. Late night, you view the city through the pink of a Sakureo gin bottle. You're nameless in the lamp's sepia light, a ghost word in the distillery. I've seen the copper shining like a missile, its funnel tapering into a golden plume. I've imagined leaving handprints on its surface, playing the oversized flute to hear the fizz of rising bubbles. I can't remember if I drank it straight or on ice, perhaps tonic. Did I take you back to my hotel room, or was it the night I remember slipping down my spine? Now, as lilac infuses every early morning, I try to recall your laddered ribcage, the origin of 5 small bruises on my thigh. Tangled up in bed sheets, all that lingers is the taste of peppery juniper. And that's a little bit to do another intertext there, given that Lynn was speaking about intertextuality, is Marguerite Duras's Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is spectacular script and a incredibly moving film. So it sort of feeds into those sorts of questions. So it goes beautifully, Michelle, with all of the questions that have come up today about progression, questioning, crossing boundaries. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really beautiful reading. I love hearing all the readings in your own voices as well, which I know our viewers will, our listeners will as well. Tracy, I think I'd just love to go straight to you and ask you to share a piece as well.
I've got an older piece of writing. It goes back a few years. Just to give some context, it connects up in eggy and Japanese ways to yours, Cassandra. It's and I've chosen it because it's short and it talks to the kind of rich inspiration and confluence I've found working not necessarily in collaboration with, but alongside artists in other forms. So I think it's self-explanatory because it was a little piece I collapsed from a bigger piece for Mildura Writers Festival. They wanted a little 250 word piece. So it's called Inside, Outside at the Same Time. I met Junichiro Iwase a week into my Mildura writing residency, the day he arrived from Canada to start his artist's residency. Over our first meal together, as Jun described his artistic process, his interest in surfaces, in outsides and insides visible at once, I recognised a confluence of ideas. The novel I was working on was a reflection on insides and outsides, on breaks and cracks and edges and spaces in between. Inside the atrium of the ADFA building, that's the Australian Dried Fruit Association building, inside the atrium of the ADFA building, just outside my writing studio, Junichiro worked with eggshells and fallen tree branches to create the artwork that he would name Lunette Key. Lunette Key, 3 images. 1. From my desk, looking end on into the atrium, the broad tops of eggshell-studded branches hanging suspended became the bleached jawbones of a great ghostly whale. Branches shifted, swam as air moved in the atrium. Atrium became aquarium. I seemed to be inside it, underwater, though I knew I was not. 2. Locking up, leaving, I flicked off switches. The day's last light leaked through the roof space into the atrium. Lunette Key trapped the light like a lens or many lenses, focusing, transmitting light in all directions, each fragment of eggshell illuminated and illuminating. 3. Breeze. Branches shifted scale, became smaller, or I, Alice-like, became bigger. I snorkeled, peered through spit-cleared goggles. I looked through a microscope's magnifying lens. Eggshells became sun-bleached discs of coralline algae, chalk white, bright, covering branches of brown seaweed. Jawbone, seaweed, whale, light, lens. Lunette Key was at once beautiful, strange, and unsettling.
Really wonderful. Thank you. Did you say that was 250 words?
254 words, Michelle.
It's amazing because I love that about the small form, whether it's fiction or creative nonfiction or whatever. That small form is always surprising because it feels like something much bigger than 250 words. And when you see it on the page, you know, it's quite compact, right? Yeah, yeah. Really wonderful to hear that. Thank you. Yeah. I brought along something to read as well because I thought, well, we may as well all participate in this. And interestingly enough, I mean, I had a couple ideas, but because of the conversation and the idea of, you know, responding to the world around us and, yeah, maybe a little bit towards that ekphrastic idea, although this isn't about a painting at all, but besides, I mentioned early on, you know, historian, but I'm also a sailor. And so I love to write about weather. I write about weather a lot and sea. And so, but sometimes when I'm writing about weather, it's not really about weather. So I'm going to read this piece called Squall, and it's in a collection that's forthcoming in September. Which is a poetry collection. I think I'm calling it poetry, but it is in that weird space because some of them are stories, some of them are about childhood, some of them are about very much about politics of today. So it's a blending of a lot of things. So this is about weather, and it's called Squall. Even before they race your way, there are signs. There are always signs. In the distance, clouds will build in towering heights, Wagnerian, touch down on the horizon. The line between blackening sky and purpling sea will nearly disappear. Where there is rain, a sheet of gray will connect them. The air will become acid, anticipation electric. From behind the magnificent skies, the sun may shine through, glowing like a god. As the squall approaches, the sea top will become disturbed. Wavelets whipped into action by the oncoming wind, everything turns gray. Rachmaninoff rain pounds the sea flat. You will hear it, especially at night, moments before it lands. I lost my place. Moments before it lands on deck. When the squall is upon you, clashing wind and water, fugue-like acceleration and speed, 30 knots or more, lasting 3 minutes or an hour. When it's over, silence. Then, slatting sails, sloshing sea, directionless drifting as the boat tries to regain balance and find her way again. Now, French horns, Sibelius, colors blazing, arcing the story of rainbow, sails up and onward.
Wow, I want to know about the classical music references. I love that. I love the way that you've brought those together. Are you a music aficionado, or tell me about that element?
Well, my mother's a classical pianist, and I grew up playing classical piano. And almost, strangely enough, almost went that direction towards performance. I had a two-piano partner. We were best friends from the age 5, and we grew up playing two pianos together. So our repertoire was really exciting. And again, that's kind of that ensemble work where it's a collaboration where, working with someone else always yields much bigger results. And so we really loved it and considered, at the age of going off to university, we went and looked at conservatories and had interviews and thought about it. And in the end, we just both decided maybe that wasn't our career. Maybe we would do other things. But but music is very much a part of my whole family. And so it enters in places too. But what happened there is I wanted to find a way to just, I'm always thinking of how do you describe weather if you don't know a squall in the middle of the ocean, when you're in the tropics, how do you describe it? So that's kind of almost reverse ekphrastic, maybe trying to bring something imagistic to the page, which is of course the task we all have when you have something abstract or possibly maybe unusual or foreign to a lot of readers. How do you put it on the page? That's always the big question, isn't it? Yeah. Well, we're near the end of our hour, but I don't want to end with my reading. That would be just silly. So I want to end with one other question for everybody. And I'm thinking about whether you ever had a moment in your creative practice where you had a collaboration or where you went across a boundary and it caused a pretty significant shift in perspective, a change in your attitude, or opened up some new ideas and spaces. I would love to hear each of you talk about that, because whether it's about your own moving outside of boundaries or collaborating with other people, I know you all work with lots of other people. Did you ever have a moment that really stands out, or maybe there are many moments where a real seismic shift happened, something changed in your practice?
I'll just quickly say that it's not so much collaborations for me, because I'm not really in that space, but it's more what I've come to think of as hauntings. It's hauntings by artists and artworks, and the earliest of those was seeing an artwork in that I've carried through my creative process, and that's come back to haunt me at the moment in my next process is seeing an artwork in 1997 here in Wellington. It was the Ralph Hautere and Bill Colbert piece, Pathway to the Sea, Aramoana. And I just keep coming back to it, and now I'm trying to find a way to make it part of the current project. So, but there are many other instances of these hauntings, and they come back and over again, and they're almost always about artworks.
Cool. I would find, personally for me, I think I've always been a collaborator, but recently I was walking down the street and I saw a guy that I often see. He doesn't have any teeth. We've sort of formed a bit of a friendship, but this was the first time I'd seen him, or maybe the second. And he said, "Where are you off to? You look like you're going to work." And I said, "Oh no, I've just been working on a poem." And he said, "Could you read it to me?" As I was walking along. And I was like, no, it's not ready yet. It's not ready. And he said, "No, please, miss, could you read it to me?" And so I read him a bit of it. And then I said, "Do you want to get something to eat?" And I got him something to eat. And he was eating a hamburger while I read him this poem. And it was about a matuku bird, which is a bird which has a lot of spiritual qualities in Māoridom. And he really connected with this poem, this young guy. And then he spoke to me beautifully in Māori. And sorry, I feel quite emotional talking about it, I'm not sure, but yes, I think I had a moment there where I realized that sharing your work and being inclusive in your work that was a sort of a breakthrough moment for me about how to make your work speak of the people and be of the people. Yeah.
A really beautiful story, Clarice. Thank you for sharing that. Of course, when we come into these conversations, we never know where we're going to go. So I love that you're all so open and, really sharing deeply with each other. Yeah, Lynn or Cassandra, do you want to say something here at the end?
I've worked with an artist and publisher who likes to promote kind of artifacts that are handwritten, so taking us away from our computers and away from the structures of the layout and the proofs and all of those things that seem to go along with publishing, and to rethink what it means to write a poem and have somebody interact with it artistically, and then to put it out, I guess, a little bit like Clarice is suggesting, not having to go to a store to buy a book of poetry or accessing it online, but to have a kind of a flyer or a handwritten scrap of something that goes out in the world to everybody. So yeah, he's really opened up my eyes to what that looks like.
One of the poems that is in my book, The Gum Trees of Kirikiri, has been much more warmly received than all the others. And that is a poem about a vacuum cleaner, and it's essentially a love poem, in which I talk about the way that my partner has kept this ratty old vacuum cleaner and keeps me as well, even though I'm getting pretty ratty. And I notice when I read this poem and share it, or when people find it in the book, they really respond to it. And it's been a revelation to me, because I normally write things that are a bit dark, fairly analytical, often a wee bit, intertextual, whatever. I've never written a love poem really like that before, but now I see that that's what people actually really might like. And maybe I should write more for the warmer side of life.
Do you think if you wrote love poems, they would have to be sonnets, Lynn, or would they be freeform?
I don't know what they'd be. I don't know. That's the only example I've got.
I love the idea. Well, you said it here first. We're all going to be anticipating Lynn Jenner, the love poems. I love it. I know that poem and I love it. It's interesting that people respond to that.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really wonderful note to kind of close on, this idea that, we started with the idea that our practice is about opening up these spaces, for ourselves also as creative thinkers, and with the ideas and the physical practice of making something, that we're always. I think the idea is that in art you are always open. And of course we began with talking about our own selves, our own practice, because that's why we're all invited here. But in the end, we've sort of moved towards talking about, the whole how art is, what we're doing. It's not just for us, and it never is just for us, is it? It's for everybody. So whether it's an encounter along the road, or people receiving your work, or leaflets and flyers, or small poems going out in the world. We have a community poetry project in Otapoti here, which is going to be a way to get poems just kind of up on buildings, so that people can just access them and see them as they're walking by, whatever they're doing, if they're rushing to the supermarket or if they're taking a stroll. So I think a lot of people these days are thinking about, where those boundaries are and why noticing them and stepping across them is part of our movement forward. Yeah. So thank you all very much. I want to extend a very warm hello and thank you to each of you. It's been an absolutely wonderful hour. I feel like we could go longer, and maybe we will another time, but thank you for your really wonderful time on a Sunday morning. Thanks to viewers who are watching, and everybody please tune in for more to come. We have back-to-back panels all day long and well into the evening as well. So thanks again very much, and I look forward to seeing you and talking with you again.